Hi everyone, thanks for visiting my channel. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by. I hope you will consider subscribing. So today we have a canning video. This video is by request. I've had a ton of you message me and ask me for a video on bean soup. So we are going to be making 15 bean soup today. I've had a number of you contact me and say, is it safe to can the 15 bean soup in the package? And it is safe to can these. There's no bean in here that is not safe for canning. So that was one of the reasons why I chose this, but this method is appropriate for any type of bean soup that you want to make, as long as it's a bean that's safe for canning, and most dried beans are. So I'm going to be using the Ball Blue Book as my guide for canning up this soup. Now Ball does have two different soup recipes in here. One is 10 bean soup, and they give you the amounts of different types of beans to put together to make their 10 bean soup. And then they also have just what they are calling bean soup. The recipes are a little bit different. The regular bean soup, they're using navy beans. They are using some chopped onion. It's pretty basic ingredients, some red hot pepper, salt and pepper to taste, and they allow for a ham hock or 1/4 pound of salt pork for 2 cups of dried beans. Now the 10 bean soup, obviously they're giving you amounts of different types of beans to combine. They are allowing for 1.5 cups of diced ham, and then they're adding some different seasonings. So I'm going to do kind of a combination of the two. Just know that it is safe to add the ham. That's going to be my first question. So the safety guideline states that we should not use any cured meats in recipes that we home can. The exception to that rule is going to be, the National Center for Home Food Preservation does allow for you to throw in a few cubes of bacon in the baked bean recipes that they have. And then Ball, their research has shown that it is safe to use ham. I would not deviate and use other types of cured meats. I would stick to the amount that they are allowing for in here, and I would stick to ham. So I'm not saying that you can use smoked sausage or any other type of cured or smoked meat. We're just going to stick to the recipe here, and we're going to use the ham that they are allowing. Now the 15 bean soup, that package of beans is approximately 3 cups of dried beans. The recipe in the Ball Blue Book for their 10 bean soup is approximately 4 cups of beans. So I'm using approximate amounts, but still trying to stick to the guidelines. That being said, they do say to use water in the recipe. You can substitute stock, which I'm going to do. I have reconstituted some of the roasted chicken better than bouillon, and that's what I'm going to use as the soupy part of my bean soup. You could also throw in some tomatoes. I know some people like to use tomatoes or tomato sauce in their bean soup. That's safe to do as part of your liquid. But again, the main focus here is to allow you to use ham, which I know you guys love to do, but make sure that you're sticking to the correct amount. They are allowing for 1.5 cups of diced ham in the soup. I'm going to use about 1 cup because my bean ratio is a little bit different. So I'm not going to use the full 1.5 cups. I'm only going to use 1 cup. So also know that the regular bean soup that they have in here, I did mention that they allow for some chopped onion, so you could certainly add some chopped onion to this. So we're pretty much sticking to the tested recipe. I'm modifying things just a little bit, but again, they are safe modifications. As far as seasoning, the 15 bean soup does come with a seasoning packet. You could totally use that if you wanted to. I'm not going to. I'm going to discard the packet, and I'm going to use some of my own dried spices, and I will tell you what I'm using to season up my soup. You can leave out seasonings if you want to, but you could use any dried spice that appeals to you and your palate in the soup. It's totally fine to do. Just a few things about beans. And I get tons of questions about canning beans because they can be a little bit fickle, and at the end they can leave us wondering if our product is safe. Beans tend to absorb liquid as they sit on your shelf, and they tend to get thick, and most people are once their beans have sat on the shelf, whether they're baked beans or it's a bean soup, become alarmed that the amount of liquid that they started with is not the same as what is in the jar now. As long as you have half of your jar, halfway up your jar is still filled with liquid, it is safe to consume. So for me, and because we're making a soup, I'm gonna err on the side of caution, and I have learned with beans to err on the side of caution and add more liquid than less liquid. The method that Ball is using states to fill your jar to 1 inch headspace with your soup and with your beans. That's also what the National Center for Home Food Preservation says to do when you are just canning beans in general, fill to the 1 inch headspace. I have found that when you do that with the broth, water, stock, whatever you're using, and your beans to the 1 inch headspace, they tend to start getting thick as they sit on the shelf. So I am going to add just my beans. I'm going to put about just over half to 2/3, about 2/3 of my jar is going to be beans, and then I'm going to top it off with the soup part. If you want a soupier soup, you want fewer beans and more soup, just add less of your beans and more of your stock or water, whatever liquid you are using. So to begin, the first thing we have to do is soak our beans. It is never safe to can dried beans. All of the processing times were developed using rehydrated beans, so please do not ever can beans that are dried and not rehydrated. So the method that Ball uses in here is they do a quick soak. I have found that doing a quick soak is the best method to use to get the best texture for your beans. Soaking overnight, a lot of people like to do, but I have found your beans are a little bit softer, and then people are concerned about the texture of their beans. They don't really like that their beans are that soft after the canning. So I always do a quick soak, which is what Ball is using in their recipes here. So I've taken my package of 15 bean soup. I have rinsed all of my dried beans. I put them in a stock pot, covered them with water by 2 inches. I brought them to a boil. I boiled them for 2 minutes, and then I have let them sit for an hour. So that's where we are. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drain them of their soaking liquid. And then we are going to add our stock, our spices, and our ham, and we're going to let our beans simmer for 30 minutes, which is the proper guideline for canning beans. The guideline does state that you should simmer your beans for 30 minutes prior to canning them. So that is what we are going to do. Again, many people contact me and say, my beans are too soft. What happened? Boil them very gently. You do not want to boil them hard for 30 minutes and then process them for the 75 minutes for pints or the 90 minutes for quarts. They do have a long processing time, so you just want to boil them gently. But the guideline does state that we should simmer them, boil them for about 30 minutes. But do not boil them hard, or the texture of them will be extremely soft in your jar. And that's true for this soup. It's also true for just canning up any type of bean in general, including baked beans. So I'm going to drain my cooking liquid. I'm going to cover them with my stock, add my ham and my spices, and then we are going to simmer this for 30 minutes. And while that's happening, I'm going to get my canner and my jars ready. Okay guys, here are my soaked and drained beans. To that, we are going to add, I'm going to add my stock. Okay, now Ball does state that they want enough liquid to cover your beans by about 2 inches, and that's approximately what I have here. It was about 10 cups of stock. So now I'm going to add my cup of cubed ham. And then for my spices, I have a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of onion powder, a half a teaspoon of chili powder, 1 teaspoon of tarragon, and 2 teaspoons of Old Bay seasonings. But again, you use whatever it is that appeals to you. And I'm just going to give that a stir. And then I am also going to add 1 bay leaf. So I'm going to turn my heat on, and we're going to bring all that up to a boil, and then I'm going to reduce it to a simmer, and I'm going to let it simmer or boil gently, very gently, for about 30 minutes. Okay guys, I just wanted to bring you back and show you the nice gentle simmer that I have going on here. It's nothing too crazy, just a nice consistent, gentle simmer is what you want for about 30 minutes. So while that is happening, like I said, I'm going to get my canner and my jars ready, and we will be all set for canning up our soup. All right, guys, we are all set for canning. I let my soup simmer for 30 minutes. Like I said, I have 3 inches of simmering water in my All-American pressure canner ready to go. We're going to start with 2 hot jars. My first jar, I'm just going to fill like the instructions say, to fill your soup and your beans to 1 inch headspace. So just whatever comes out of my ladle. The second one, I'm going to just add the beans first, about 2/3 full, and then I'm going to top it off with my liquid. Make sure you get rid of your bay leaf. So we've got a jar about 2/3 full of beans, and now I'm going to top it off with my liquid. Either way, you want 1 inch headspace when you're done. Then you're going to take your debubbling tool, butter knife, plastic butter knife, or chopstick to release any air bubbles. So just poke around your jar. Then we need to clean our rims. I always use a paper towel that's been dipped in white vinegar to wipe the rims of my jars. I want to get a good seal. And I'm going to place my lids. And then add my rings to fingertip tight. And in the canner they go. Okay guys, I filled my canner with 7 pint-sized jars of my soup. So now we're going to add the lid for the All-American canner. You line up the notch with the arrow, and then you're going to tighten the thumb screws 2 at a time, opposites. Okay, now what we're going to do is what we call venting. We are going to allow steam to escape from our steam vent for 10 minutes, and then after that time is up, we can put our weight on and wait for it to start rocking, and then we can start our processing time. When we get there, I'll bring you back. Okay guys, we've been venting for about 10 minutes. Like I said, for those of you who are new, venting just means you want a steady stream of steam coming out of your steam vent for about 10 minutes. Make sure you know your altitude. I am processing at less than 1,000 feet, so my PSI is going to be 10, so I'm going to put on my weight at 10 PSI. If you have a dial gauge canner, you're going to be processing at 11 PSI. For those of you at different altitudes, you need to check with the altitude adjustment table to see at what PSI you should be canning. So what we're going to do now is I've got my heat cranked up to high. I'm going to wait for my weight to start rocking, and then at that time we can start our processing time. Okay, my weight has started rocking, so I can start my processing time. Like I said, 75 minutes for pints, 90 minutes for quarts. For those of you who have a weighted gauge canner, you want the weight to rock 1 to 3, 1 to 4 times a minute. So I'm going to adjust my heat just to maintain the rocking. For those who are using a dial gauge canner, you want to make sure you maintain 11 PSI. Process for the appropriate time. Okay guys, we are all done. I got 7 jars like I told you, and I processed for the 75 minutes. If you are processing in quarts, you want to make sure you process for 90 minutes. Once my processing time was up, I turned my heat off, let my canner return to 0 pressure naturally, and then took the weight off, waited 5 minutes, took the lid off, and then let my jar sit an additional 10 minutes in the canner. So we are all done. But I made a mistake. I was distracted doing too many things this morning, and I forgot to put the vinegar that I use. You know how I dip my paper towel in vinegar? I usually take that vinegar and pour it in my canner to keep my jars nice and clean during the canning process. If you don't do that, see the mineral deposits, your jars are kind of yucky looking. I mean, you can get that off after the fact. Once they cool completely, you can get that off, but I don't really like it on there, and it's a lot easier to not have to deal with it just by adding the vinegar to your canning water. So just a little tip there if you did not know that. We'll let I'll let my jars sit undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours, then remove the bands, check the seals, and wash my jars really well, and then label them and store them. So for those of you who are wondering, since I moved, I have been using a flat top stove. Before I had a gas stove, which I absolutely loved, and it is what I prefer, but where I'm living now has this flat top stove. So this was my first run with the flat top stove, and I did not have any trouble with canning at all. I know some of them cycle on and cycle off when they're heating, trying to maintain the heat, but I didn't have any trouble maintaining pressure. So this worked beautifully for me. The All American Canner website does state that they are safe to use on a glass stovetop. They do recommend that you obviously don't drop your canner on the stovetop because it will break it. It is glass, but All American Canner does say that you can use them on a glass stovetop. It's always best to check with your manufacturer though, just in case that it may not be recommended for your stove, but just as an FYI, I had absolutely no trouble maintaining the pressure in my canner for this run. So I hope you guys enjoyed coming along with me today. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them for me in the comment section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and I will see you next time. Have a great day.